All right, so I will stop sharing here and we'll go ahead and start our webinar for this evening. As people have already started doing, I'm seeing people putting where they're joining from in the chat. This is an open chat, and it is always wonderful to have people sharing where they're joining from, what groups they're representing, and giving also, if you're part of events happening against war in your cities, you can always share those in the chat. We strive to have this webinar as a chance to discuss the political issues, but we know those always lead to needing to come together in action on the streets against war. I encourage people, if you have an event you're organizing for Palestine, against war, for Iran, you can always put those in the chat. So welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Understanding the U.S.-Israeli Aggression in West Asia. My name is Janine Solanki, and I'm on the coordinating committee of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. And I'm also the chair of Mobilization Against War and Occupation in Vancouver, based in Vancouver, and also the coordinator of Metro Vancouver United for Palestine. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all from Vancouver, where I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I know many of us are joining from across Canada, from other parts of the world, and as we're talking about the self-determination and that important struggle in West Asia, I also invite people to think about and remember our responsibility if we're residing on Indigenous territories for the struggle of Indigenous nations for self-determination. And I hope we all take a moment to reflect on that responsibility we all have. As I said, we are keeping the chat open, and we will have a Q&A period later on. So I want to remind everyone that we're open to constructive dialogue and discussion that's productive and respectful, but if there are disrespectful or disruptive comments in the chat, they will not be tolerated. If someone is disrupting the chat, they will be removed. So I just ask people to take that into account. I encourage people, though, as I said, to share where they're joining from as we're together here in this global space. This webinar tonight is organized by the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. We are 60 member groups from all across Canada, working on many different issues, but uniting together against war, occupation, sanctions campaigns, and military aggressions. And I think we have built over the last around 6 years a very important united front in Canada against this escalating war drive by the United States imperialists and their imperialist allies, including Canada, and especially focusing on the actions of Canada in war and occupations abroad. So I'll put our website in the chat. I also encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Medium, or on YouTube, where this webinar will also be posted. So as today we're discussing the U.S.-Israeli war drive against Iran, the genocide in Gaza, the bombing of Lebanon, we're in a period of time where I think we're in a historic turning point. And it's important, you know, where I think many of us are on the streets organizing rallies, coming up with demands and shouting them at the top of our voices when we're on the streets. But there has to sometimes be a point where we come together like we are today and have the chance to discuss where we are in this historic moment and really what is our responsibility and our job as anti-war activists and anti-war movements. I also want to mention that while we're discussing West Asia primarily today, West Asia is not alone. And what we're seeing, of course, is the U.S. threats against Cuba are escalating. Trump has repeatedly said that Cuba is next after Iran. And just today, we received the news that that the United States is indicting former President Raul Castro. This is, of course, a sham and another excuse that the United States likes to use to attack any country it likes. We've seen this time and time again with their claims of regime change from Iran to Venezuela. And it really is, I think, an important message and signal to all of us to be on high alert, to see that there really is no international law being upheld. It is being upheld by people who are coming out onto the streets and demanding an end to these U.S. Attacks on so many different countries, and now potentially Cuba in the near future, after already decades of increasing blockade and oil embargo. So we'll also talk a little bit about that during our speakers, from our speakers today. Our speakers today, we have a really excellent lineup of speakers. We have Dr. Marwa Osman, who is a Lebanese academic, journalist, and political commentator and host and producer of PressTV's show, The MidEaStream. She is going to be joining us via video message. We have Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, who is a Palestinian feminist, intellectual, scholar, activist, and professor. Mona Ghassemi, who is the president of the Iranian Canadian Congress. Ali Mala, who is an anti-war community and union activist and board member of Just Peace Advocates. And Zafar Bangash, who's the director and Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought and author of several books. And we'll have more of a full introduction to all of our speakers as we introduce them. After our speakers, we will have some time, about half an hour, for question and answers. So one last guideline for everyone: if you do have questions throughout the speakers or at the end of the speakers, at the bottom panel you should see a Q&A box, and you can put your questions and answers in there, or sorry, your questions, and I will be reading them during our Q&A session for our speakers. Sorry, that was a lot of speaking, so give me a moment. All right, so before we go straight into our speakers, I did want to give a little bit of an introduction to frame our discussion and why we are here today. I think as many of us on this webinar are activists or people who are coming out to protests, we often are very, very, very aware of the daily brutality of the Zionist regime and U.S. imperialists and their allies. But we might sometimes lose sight of the significance of what we have accomplished alongside millions of people around the world who are joining the solidarity movement with Palestine, Lebanon, and Iran. Really this unprecedented time, and how this struggle against Zionism and imperialism has changed really the course of events in West Asia. We truly are in a turning point in the world, and I think we need to have some time to understand what's happening around us and how we all are part of this historic movement. Since October 7th, 2023, when the armed wing of the Palestinian resistance decided there was no choice but to fight back against the brutal siege and occupation of Gaza, to today, one thing that Israel has had to concede and had to grapple with is the fact that the false veil of invincibility has really been lifted from Zionist Israel. The idea that Israel can exist on the occupation of Palestinian land propped up by the US government has been shattered, and I don't think can ever be put back together again. We often focus on what we have witnessed in the last 2.5 years as the genocide, but we have also witnessed the immense strength and determination of the Palestinian people who have resisted, even by building makeshift tents to continue their education, as they've created poetry and art, as they've still continued to resist the continued Israeli Zionist attacks on their people. So we've seen in Palestine that 100 years on, really, and 2.5 years after the genocide, Palestinians are fighting back to defend their homeland, and the Palestinian resistance is unbroken. In the last 2 months of the war on Iran, as our speakers will also go into more deeply, we've seen not just the attacks on Iran, but we've seen that the US imperialists and all of their military might have suffered devastating and unprecedented losses in West Asia. Almost all of their military bases have been severely damaged or destroyed, and we've never seen a moment like this where US soldiers have had to evacuate. So we are now also seeing Iran showing the world that the US military might is exposed as vulnerable. And also we've seen that no goal that US imperialists have started out with the war in Iran have been achieved. They have not been able to force so-called regime change. They have not achieved their goal of ending Iran's nuclear program or missile defense. And in the Strait of Hormuz, they've shown who really controls that waterway. And also with the failing economy as a result of the US war on Iran, they've shown that the US is now having to negotiate both with Iran and China to get themselves out of the mess they have created. So today we're really part of a changing world. It's not just these points in isolation. It's not Iran having the upper hand in the war, but really the entire axis of resistance from Iran to Palestine to Lebanon and Hezbollah to Iraq and Yemen. And we are also part of this as people who are joining on the streets, who are showing that we stand for justice and humanity. And we're winning this battle of liberation, self-determination, and sovereignty, and for the US and Israel out of West Asia. So I know our speakers have a lot that they're going to delve into on this topic, but I wanted to start off with that bit of framing of how we are, the position we're in, and how it really is a time not to sit back, but a time to keep pushing forward as we're on the winning side of this huge battle. I'm going to now introduce our first speaker for the evening, Mona Ghassemi, who is a first-generation Iranian Canadian raised and based in Montreal. They are currently serving as the president of the board of directors of the Iranian Canadian Congress, ICC, where they support civic participation, community advocacy, and dialogue within the Iranian Canadian community. And previously, as vice president, they were one of the organization's official representatives to Canada's 2023 public inquiry into foreign interference, advocating in Ottawa for the rights and dignity of Iranian Canadians. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to you, Mona. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you for the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network doing such wonderful work and hosting these webinars. So we're living in a very difficult time with the absolute devastation that is being wrought on West Asia as a region, and the suffering that's being inflicted upon us as Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Iranians, and all peoples of the region by the joint settler, colonialist, and expansionist efforts of the US and Israel. As peoples of West Asia, our causes are intertwined. As an Iranian Canadian and president of the Iranian Canadian Congress, the focus of my talk will be on Iran and on my advocacy experience, but I am discussing concepts that can be applied as a theoretical framework more broadly and to other specific contexts as well. So we know about the 12-day war that was initiated by Israel against Iran in June of last year, which ended with the US bombing of Iranian nuclear enrichment sites. And we also know about what is being referred to as the Ramadan War that began on February 28th with the joint US-Israeli bombardment of Iran and is now in a tenuous state of ceasefire. These actions correspond to what Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci referred to as a war of maneuver, which is defined as a rapid frontal assault to disrupt the status quo. In contrast, Gramsci also defines a war of position, which is slower, focused on building long-term consensus and influence within institutions and public opinion. Both of these strategies are important both for the imperialist aggressors and those on the front lines of resistance. But I want to focus on the war of position, which is where, as ordinary citizens and activists, we have the most impact. I'll discuss a few key lines of argument or attack in the current war of position against Iran. And I'll discuss how these strategies serve both to quote unquote manufacture consent and beyond that invent reality, as per Michael Parenti's book on the matter, whose website describes it as demonstrating how the media shape public awareness and attitudes through distortion or suppression of specific information. And I'll do this through discussion of the case study of an email exchange between ICC and the Office of the Prime Minister of Canada. When activists speak out against the numerous illegal offensives in the war of maneuver against Iran, the imperialist institutions, including the media and the political establishment, have several red herrings at the ready. These include the tired discussion of Iran's nuclear program and an emphasis on alleged human rights abuses by the Iranian government, as if these issues somehow justify the abuses by foreign governments, which include the killing of civilians through both the hot war and more subtle means such as economic sanctions. There's also criticism of Iran that rests on the assumption that institutionalized religion within Iran's system of government is inherently wrong or anti-democratic, which I think is a case of ethnocentrism that needs to be problematized. But I will not discuss that at length here. Instead, I want to focus on an example from my own experience working with the Canadian ICC, and we can use this to understand the role of Canada in this war of position and how we should respond to it. So my case study is the recent response of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to the ICC. Janine, I shared the link to that with you. Maybe you can open the first link to share with the audience, which was dated. So that response was dated May 13th. And the response was in response to a two-page letter I sent on behalf of ICC, wherein I requested the Prime Minister retract his original statement dated February 28th, the same day as the start of the US-Israeli bombing of Iran, an unprovoked act of aggression for which he expressed support. In the letter, I discussed the widespread damage to civilian infrastructure and human losses, including emphasis on the attacks against the Shajar Tayyibeh Elementary School in Minab, in which approximately 165 people, mostly children, were killed. In my letter, I also took time to break down Mike Carney's statements, questioning his use of the term Iran-related hostilities to describe the unprovoked attacks on Iranian soil, his characterization of Iran as the main source of instability in the region, and the distractor that Iran must never be allowed to obtain or develop nuclear weapons. I also pointed out the contradiction in the inclusion of two statements, on the one hand, that Canada stands with the Iranian people, and on the other, that Canada supports the United States in its military aggressions against Iran. And Janine, if you can open the next link, this is Prime Minister Carney's response to my letter. When I saw this response in my inbox a few days ago, I was deeply offended. It begins with a cordial acknowledgement of the concerns expressed, appearing to engage with the contents of my letter, but instead of actually engaging, it repeats the same positioning of the statement that I, along with my colleagues at the ICC, had taken the time to engage with and critique. In the second paragraph, Carney brings forward the human rights argument, discussing, quote unquote, profoundly concerning violence, arbitrary arrests, and intimidation tactics by the Iranian government, failing to acknowledge that the events of early January were precipitated by imperialist encirclement and the long-standing interference and influence operations by Israel and the US against Iran. The very protests that began at the end of December were spurred on by the economic sanctions and currency manipulation by the US. I had discussed all this in my interview with CBC's David Cochran on his show Power and Politics on January 15th, following which I received numerous attacks, I suppose, for daring to frame things differently from the mainstream media narrative and citing Israel's own media sources in support of my statements. Moving on, in the third paragraph, Carney discusses numerous actions taken by Canada against Iran, including sanctions, something ICC has consistently fought against. So I guess he has no idea about ICC's positioning and is just sending like a boilerplate response. In the fourth and concluding paragraph, the Prime Minister welcomes the ceasefire. Notably, he implores all parties to act in accordance with international law, but only condemns quote-unquote strikes carried out by Iran on civilians and civilian infrastructure. Nowhere does he actually condemn the US or Israel, or even mention in this letter or anywhere else the child victims of the attacks on the elementary school in Minab. Why does Carney or his office not actually engage with serious concerns expressed by Canadian citizens regarding Canada's position in the war of maneuver? We can see the same pattern in a recent interview of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand, with Al Jazeera, which I encourage the audience to watch if you have not already. In that interview, Minister Anand avoids any questions put to her regarding whether Canada needs to prepare military defenses against the US. She diverts and speaks instead about how much Canada's defense systems are intertwined with those of the US. It bears mention that this entwinement is a real material issue that impacts Canadian politics and the extent to which Canada can actually oppose the US, including threats against Canadian sovereignty. But what's more interesting to me is how the Canadian government, administering a settler colonial nation that at the administrative level is ideologically aligned with the US, toes that ideological line regardless of the discussion and the critique it is facing. And we can see this pattern with Palestine as well. For example, at the municipal level, you can look at the work of the network of apartheid-free communities. Instagram accounts like that of Montreal Anti-Apartheid include clips of activists confronting their municipal representatives on the issue of Israeli apartheid. And the way the politicians respond shows a surface level engagement that is usually dismissive and serves only as a low effort attempt to make the questioner feel heard while moving on with business as usual. Thank you, Janine. We can close the link now. Carney or his secretary may or may not have read the letter from ICC, but their response, as with their public statements, shows their war of position at work. Canadian foreign policy towards Iran is hostile. It has not always been. The Liberal government in 2015 promised to restore diplomatic relationships with Iran and didn't, going even further than the Harper government by expropriating the Iranian embassy and donating the land to Israeli charities as quote-unquote victims of terrorism. In order to continue this policy while minimizing public dissent, Carney's statements do the work of inventing reality. For a reader of Carney's statements who does not have additional context about Iran, it would seem that Iran is the party at fault, indeed the only party at fault. That is perhaps what the Carney administration believes and certainly what it projects. Speaking of inventing reality, Carney's letter also mentioned alleged foreign interference by Iran in Canada. ICC participated in the public inquiry into foreign interference in 2023 to 2024 and noted then that, according to its own redacted documents that were shared with the participating organizations, CSIS had very little to say on actual foreign interference by the Iranian government. As a matter of fact, we and our counsel, Dimitri Laskaris, were skeptical of the proceedings in general, and along with members of the Chinese Canadian community, had some criticisms. Recently, a report from the Canadian Justice and Peace in the Middle East organization, they have published some findings on Israeli foreign interference in Canada, which, along with foreign influence and interference by the US, was an argument brought by ICC to the Foreign Interference Commission. ICC's report was published on the Commission's website, but not really taken into account as allies were considered by the judge to be out of the scope of the investigation. The work of the Foreign Interference Commission was questioned by skeptical activists as a political theater, sowing doubt in the minds of the Canadian population about the usual suspects, already determined state enemies. What I want to highlight here is that even proceedings such as the public inquiry into foreign interference serve to create the backdrop or precedent for allegations of wrongdoing by so-called enemy states, even if the findings are inconclusive or do not show anything of substance, and even if the CSIS report is a brief statement to the effect that they basically haven't seen election interference by Iran, but there's some claims of intimidation by a few individuals. So the government uses publicized events or institutions like this to push its line, inventing reality. What is strange is that we're living in a political moment where the especially unbridled aggression of US President Donald Trump has, to use Carney's own words, destroyed any semblance of a rule-based order, leading Canada to loosen the restrictions on Chinese imports, and China was also a subject of the Foreign Interference Commission's inquiry. So that shows that things can change. In this case, Trump's war of maneuver, or the tariff war, which included China and extended to Canada, interfered with Canada's war of position alignment with the US, and Canada responded by realigning with China. So with that in mind, as activists, we need to be critical of what we're told in the media and ask questions about the intent behind which stories and which voices are featured. In the case of Iran, we saw the way the war of position was used in how the events of January 8th and 9th were read and represented, allowing for the war of maneuver to escalate with the bombings that began on January 28th. There was essentially no real excuse, no aggression committed by Iran against other states, but the shaping of public discourse provided an opening for the US and Israel to pursue their long-standing goal of controlling Iran and preventing its operation as a sovereign nation, something that the British had done until Iranians resisted by nationalizing their oil, to which the US and Britain responded with the coup of 1953, putting in place Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as Shah, and Iranians once again resisted by ousting the Shah in the revolution of 1979. So this has been a long-standing process. My own lived experience as an activist in the last year, but also prior, has been shaped by grappling with these discourses and speaking truth to power in whatever forum I could access. An obstacle in uniting Canadians against this aggressive position Carney maintains is the demonization of the Islamic Republic even within our movements. which is exemplified in a campaign ICC ran in support of activist Khadija Barb. You can read our statements regarding that issue on our website, but essentially Khadija was attacked for holding an Iranian flag at a protest, and an organization she volunteered with chose to divest itself from this act of solidarity by dissociating with her. So I want to encourage folks to fight against the normalization of this demonization by flying the Iranian flag and calling for the restoration of diplomatic relations and calling for an end to sanctions. The idea that we should withhold our solidarity because the Iranian state is complex and has its faults is, to me, among the most nefarious ideas that has entered our movements. It encourages passivity and inaction, while for the agents of empire, the war of position and maneuver continue unstayed. On that note, our Prime Minister did not acknowledge the young student victims of the U.S. double-tap bombing of Minam's elementary school, but ICC is circulating a parliamentary petition to force the government to do so. Please sign that. I've already shared it in the chat. And thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much, Mona. It is great to have you on here. We had a webinar also in just a few days before the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran in February, and it was really important to have that webinar and to have Mona on at that time in the lead up to what we then found out would be an open war just a few days later. So we've been looking forward to having this webinar, to have Mona back on this webinar with us today. So thank you, Mona, for all of those updates and your thoughts and analysis. And I encourage everyone to sign the petition initiated by the Iranian Canadian Congress Vice President, which is being put in the chat, and to follow and learn more about the Iranian Canadian Congress, which is doing very important work across Canada and is also a member group of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. I'm going to go now to our next speaker, Zafar Bangash, who is the director of the Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought and the author of several books. For 4 decades, he has been on the editorial board of Crescent International, which is a Canadian magazine that specializes in Iranian and Middle East affairs. He has visited Iran many times during the war, including to the war front during the Iraq-Iran war, and was the first to report on Iraq's use of chemical weapons. He served on the steering committee also of the Canadian Peace Alliance. So let's welcome virtually Zafar Bangash, and I will pass you the virtual mic. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody. I think I'm getting some echo.
Yeah, I think you were joined twice.
Okay, so let me.
Now you sound fine right now, so you could go ahead now as you are now.
Okay, all right. Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network for the opportunity to participate in this very, very important webinar with a distinguished panel of speakers. I also want to thank my dear friend Ken Stone for inviting me. And I'm particularly pleased that the webinar has used the correct terminology to describe the region as West Asia and not use the colonial construct, the Middle East. In my presentation, I'd like to focus on the US-Israeli war's impact on the Arabian regimes in the region. Let me state quite categorically that all of them are illegitimate. Most of these states are also artificial constructs, the product of British colonialism. We can list them actually: Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. These states did not exist 100 years ago. Some are even more recent creations, such as the UAE and Bahrain. The US and Israel launched their illegal and unprovoked war on February 28th on the assumption that Iran would soon collapse. Given the huge disparity in their military budgets, This was not an unrealistic assumption, especially given the decades of sanctions that Iran has suffered. Further, its oil income remains frozen and it has had difficulty exporting oil and other products. If we quickly look at the budgets of the protagonists, the US war budget for 2026 is more than $1.05 trillion. Add to that the Zionist entity's military budget of $45 billion, and between the two of them, their military budgets amount to $1.55 trillion. Now compare that to Iran's annual defense budget of $7.4 billion in 2025. It is minuscule compared to the budget of the two criminal regimes. Based on such a huge disparity in military spending, Iran was and is no match for the firepower of US and Israel. Yet it not only withstood their combined onslaught, that was also incidentally backed by most of the European countries and the Arabian potentates, but Tehran retaliated hard and inflicted great damage on US and Israeli military assets. In this equation, credit must also go to the Iranian people for holding together under such difficult circumstances, despite incessant Western propaganda that they are opposed to the Islamic government. The people of Iran have held rallies every night in major cities in support of the government and against US Zionist aggression. As mentioned by Mona, we must not forget the criminal attack on the Menab Girls' School, in which 168 young girls aged between 7 to 12 were murdered in cold blood on the first day of the illegal war. Add to that the assassination of Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, several members of his family, and most top military commanders, and one can see and feel the anger of the Iranian people. Universities, hospitals, bridges, and apartment buildings have all been bombed and destroyed. These constitute war crimes. Iran's military commanders devised a brilliant strategy to confront the war criminals. Leaders at the highest level had warned that if attacked, the war would not be confined to the borders of Iran. US military bases in the region will be targeted together with the Zionist entity's military installations. Tehran launched swarms of drones and missiles to overwhelm US defense systems on more than 17 military bases. This strategy proved highly effective. While the US government claimed that little damage was done to its bases, American media outlets using satellite imagery have reported massive damage. For instance, the Wall Street Journal was the first to report such damage, followed by CNN and most recently Washington Post. In the face of such powerful Iranian strikes, US troops fled their bases and took refuge in hotels in Kuwait, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, and Saudi Arabia. Iranian Shahed 136 drones pursued them into their hotel hideouts. The Cradle, an American website, gave a very interesting twist to the strikes, saying that Shahed 136 had launched room service for US soldiers in hotels across the region. The larger story, according to the Cradle, was that these bases may not be built at all. They are exposed, ruinously expensive, and now sit inside Iran's demonstrated strike envelope. The Arabian dictators complained to the UN that Iran was hitting their civilian infrastructure, and I will put that in quote. When enemy soldiers hide in hotels, they become legitimate military targets. These bases, the American bases built at the cost of billions of dollars, were supposed to provide protection to these regimes. If the US can't protect its own bases and its troops, how can they protect these regimes? I also want to touch on the policies of some of the Arabian regimes. Of course, there are differences of approaches, Some are more hostile to Iran, such as Bahrain, the UAE, and Kuwait, than others. Of the 6 GCC countries, that is Gulf Cooperation countries, Oman is the most friendly to Iran, followed by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Now, on May 13th, Benjamin Netanyahu, the indicted war criminal's office, announced that he had secretly visited the UAE in March at the height of the US Zionist war on Iran and met UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed. It caused huge embarrassment in Abu Dhabi. The announcement on X also said the indicted war criminals meeting had led to a historic breakthrough. The UAE Foreign Ministry, of course, denied the Zionist claim, saying it was entirely unfounded, but few believed it. Israel has deployed anti-missile Iron Dome batteries to help combat Iranian attacks. This was revealed by US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee on May 12th. Huckabee, who we know is a Christian Zionist and a staunch supporter of the Zionist expansionist project, revealed that this is the first time that the Iron Dome has been deployed outside Israel. And of course, it is manned and operated by the Israelis. To understand UAE's close relationships with Israel, we need to take note of the fact that in November of 2025, the Emiratis signed a $2.3 billion agreement with Israel's Elbit Systems to produce military equipment in Abu Dhabi. And following Netanyahu's recent secret visit, the UAE and Israel have set up a special fund to finance research and manufacture military hardware. The UAE will provide funds while Israel will supply technical expertise. It is not surprising that the two Arabian entities most hostile to Iran are the UAE and Bahrain. Until 1970, Iran claimed Bahrain, and incidentally, the overwhelming majority of the population in Bahrain, some 90%, are Shias, which is the religion of the people of Iran as well, whereas a tiny minority is ruling over them and suppressing them very, very harshly. Today, Bahrain is under US control because the US Fifth Fleet has its headquarters there, and it was from there that the missiles were launched at the Minab Girls' School on the first day of the US-Israeli war of aggression. And the UAE has today become virtually a Zionist colony. Long before the Abraham Accords of September 2020 that formalized relations between these Arabian potentates, Zionist Israel had deeply penetrated the UAE. Its entire security system, as well as entry and exit points at airports, are run by Mossad. The UAE has granted citizenship to more than 5,000 Israelis within months of signing the accords. This means that these Israelis can now travel to every GCC member state. In a September 13th, 2023 article for the All Arab News, Joel C. Rosenberg, of course a Zionist writer, excitedly reported that more than 1 million Israelis had already visited the UAE in the first 3 years of the accord. To put it in context, the UAE's local population is barely 1 million. There are 9 million expatriates, but they have no legal or citizenship rights, as we are witnessing today, where tens of thousands of expatriates are being expelled from the UAE on the suspicion that they may be Shias. Many of them are Pakistani citizens who have names like Ali, Hassan, and Hussein, and so they have automatically assumed that these people are Shias and therefore they have to be thrown out. And a number of Shia scholars in UAE have also been arrested. UAE ruler Mohammed bin Zayed's aggressive anti-Iran policy, however, has not been well received by the ruler of Sharjah. Despite official denials, there are reports that the ruler of Sharjah, Sheikh Sultan bin Mohammed al-Ghassemi, is unhappy with Mohammed bin Zayed's anti-Iran and scandalously pro-Israeli policies. There are even reports that he's thinking of exiting the UAE or establishing his own Republic of Sharjah. On May 17th, a drone strike on the Barakah nuclear power plant in the UAE's Al Ghafra region sparked a fire in an external electrical generator outside the plant's inner perimeter. While the UAE did not officially accuse Iran of the attack, unofficially it hinted strongly at Iran's involvement. Tehran, of course, has denied carrying out the attack, and independent reports say the drone came from the west. This would rule out Iranian involvement because Iran is to the east of the UAE. In the midst of escalating UAE hostility towards Iran, the Saudis have floated a non-aggression pact between the Arabian states and Iran. This is something that Tehran has always advocated and welcomed, although the Zionist entity and the US would oppose it. The evil duo do not want reduction in tensions. Their strategy is to stoke differences and keep the sides fighting each other. There is a growing realization that if the US cannot defend its own bases, how can it provide protection to these regimes? I also want to add a word about Pakistan's mediation role between the US and Iran. Trump is using the Pakistanis to get some kind of a deal with Iran because he knows that he has lost the war and that he needs to find an exit ramp. Iran, of course, is sticking to its conditions. The West Asian region is on the verge of a tectonic shift, with Iran firmly in the driving seat and the US likely to be out of the region pretty soon. If the Arabian regimes do not change their hostile policies towards Iran, they may disappear altogether from the map. And that would not be anything bad for peace in the region as well as the larger world, which needs peace desperately. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much to Zafar Bangash for taking us through that, the history and the current situation right now, and giving us your analysis. Thank you very much, and we're happy to have you in person this time. At our last webinar, we had a video recording from Zafar Bangash, and today we were able to have him in person with us. I am going to now go on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi is a Palestinian feminist intellectual, scholar, activist, and professor, founding director and senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas Studies program at San Francisco State University, and principal investigator of Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis, and the Indivisibility of Justice. Dr. Abdulhadi has a long history of fighting for Palestine, has co-organized several delegations to Palestine, including the Indigenous and Women of Color Feminist Delegation, and is continuing to resist ongoing Zionist attacks aimed at shutting down her Teaching Palestine program. So I will pass the mic over to you, Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for organizing this webinar and connecting me with such an amazing scholars, activists, and for also including this topic with Iran and Lebanon. It's wonderful to be able to continue to educate and organize, and it takes me back to the old days we were organizing with each other before the Shah was deposed and after, and continuing organizing, and also since the US and Israel have targeted Iran recently in an ongoing war. I want to just first start by making a land acknowledgement. I missed what you were saying because somehow the Zoom always trying to mess with us. But I wanted to say that my university sits on the occupied land of the Ramatouche Aloni people, and that we are fully committed to the right, including their right to self-determination and return to their land, and repatriation of all their lands, as we do for the Palestinians. The United States is enabling and directly involved in the ongoing genocide of indigenous people you refer to First Nations in Canada, and and we do that as we do for Palestine, and demand the return of Palestinian land to the Palestinians, the right of return, and the right of self-determination, against the genocide of Palestine, and against the Zionism that has taken on Palestine. And I want to speak about that in a minute. I also want to salute the fallen, as we do in all Palestinian events, and ask you to just join me for a moment of silence to honor and pay condolences to all the people who have fallen recently in Iran, including the young girls in the Menab school, and thousands others, as well as the people in Lebanon, South Lebanon, and Gaza, and elsewhere in Palestine. Also honoring the martyrs who have fallen in Venezuela, Congo, Sudan, South Africa, Puerto Rico, Kashmir, Minneapolis, LA, and also the last 3 people who have also been killed in San Diego and around the United States and around the world. And we remember these martyrs who have fallen a long time ago as the ones who continue to fall for the liberation of all our people. I was going to speak today about Palestine and the connections with Lebanon and Iran, but I wanted to take some time and speak about the U.S. Escalating attack against Cuba. And specifically today, trying to list as many indictments against the previous Cuban President Raúl Castro, and connect this very much with what's going on in our region in West Asia. And I do agree with my colleagues about maybe getting rid once and for all with this term, colonialist term, Middle East, that we have historically been rejecting and refusing, and also about our region in West Asia, but also the whole question of West Asia and North Africa, and basically lifting, when we talk about Arabs, lifting from Asia and Africa, lifting us all and putting us in this space that is, nobody knows where it is, in order to legitimize the presence of Israel, which is, where is the Middle East, and so on. And we are part and parcel of the third world, so we want to affirm that. And this is, in this sense, Cuba, on its own, has been a battle and a castle of resistance to U.S. attempts to colonize the Latin America and the Caribbean, and to, as a standing very strong presence against U.S. colonialism against the world. Cuba has stood for every single liberation movement around, has been standing with Iran, has been standing with Palestine, has been standing with Lebanon, not only now, historically. If anyone has taken, anyone who is maybe old enough, or somebody who wants to take on scholarship and looks at the journal, the journal that was tricontinental, that was published by OSPAL, the Organization of Solidarity of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, that was started in Cuba after the movement of non-aligned moved to Cuba because it was unable to be held in Algeria, and it couldn't be, and also the chair was killed, the Moroccan leader, and so Cuba started there. If you look at Tricontinental, which was since closed, you will see a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis about what has been going on in all these ages, and also the visits by Che Guevara, by support from Raúl Castro, Fidel Castro, and continuing now with Diaz-Canel. And so the United States has been trying to retain its control of what it's called its backyard, the Latin America and the Caribbean. United States has been known to interfere and try to oust regimes, as it did with Mossadegh in 1953. The CIA's imprints are all over the world. I also remember the United States, and including, by the way, Zionist groups like the Anti-Defamation League, spying on Iranian students in the United States and giving the information to the SAVAK, who were also torturing students, including students who were active in San Francisco State University during the 1968 longest student strike in the United States, led by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front. So this was, and this is documented. Anybody who would like to see that, we can share it with them. The Anti-Defamation League has a history with all of that. We also, the United States has been involved in all Latin American countries, has been trying to, in Cuba also in 1961 with the so-called Bay of Pigs attack, and now it's the same people who have been trying to invade Cuban airspace, and now they are claiming that the Cubans have warned the United States and said, take these planes away. Don't continue um, um, try to agitate Cuba and so on. Nobody was hurt or anything of the sort, but they are now coming on in order for them to try to extend their control over Latin America. They've already kidnapped President Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, and put them in a prison in New York. And now they're trying to do the same thing for Cuba. This will be a war. This is a declaration of war against Cuba. And not only Cuba will be defending against it, but all the world, all people in the world who support freedom and sovereignty. And Cuba also has stood by everybody, and I said, but also with the Palestinians in particular. More recently, the Cuban leadership has given 450 scholarships to Palestinians to learn medicine at their medical school in order to prepare Palestinians to go back and serve their families. There are students from Gaza, there are students from West Bank, there are students from refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and so on. Cuba has stood again and again against the genocide, and Palestine has called Israel genocidal, and Holocaust state, has done everything and has been in all international fora and so on, stood up, voted for, and so the United States is trying to destroy Cuba in order to destroy any possibilities for standing up and resisting U.S. imperialism anywhere around the world. And we have spoken about particular cases. It's really important to stand up and not weaken at all in supporting Cuba, because the United States is trying to strangle Cuba by preventing electricity, by preventing any kind of energy, and by starving the Cuban people. I mean, the United States is doing what Israel has been doing to Gaza, the blockade of 17 years, trying to weaken people in order to surrender and say, we give up to imperialism and Zionism. And as people in Gaza are saying, we're not going to give up. The Cuban people are saying we're not giving up. Of course, the Cuban people are much more advanced in terms of defense, in terms of their strength, and so on. And we're hoping also the world, the international community and the world, countries like Mexico that send some support for Cuba, Russia sent some oil and so on, but they don't get intimidated by the United States and do more and more and more to support Cuba, because we do need to have support everywhere. From whether we're talking about Latin America, we're talking and the Caribbean, we're talking about our region, West Asia, anywhere in the world, we really need to do that. And we do see that there is support in very many Latin American countries, but also in Latin America, there is a shift on balance of forces, because there are reactionary Latin American countries, the elections, and I guess some people enforced the right-wing governments that were brought to power by the United States and brought them into power. So, but there are still governments there who are against the United States and standing up. This is from one aspect what's happening from the viewpoint from Latin America. If we're looking from Latin America towards the world, rather than looking from Washington towards Latin America, i.e. looking from the viewpoint of the people who are colonized and marginalized and would really like to also continue improving their conditions, and having Cuba as a place who was supporting them. But also from Washington's side, and I'm not going to repeat what the professor has said and what has been said already, but United States is getting a lot of blows. Iran has been standing up and dealing blows to the United States, and basically telling the United States is very arrogant, as all imperialists and all historically the United States has been like that, is that we are going to go and crush Iran, we are going to go crush any country around the world. Part of it has to do with racism and elitism, that they think they can crush anybody, the arrogance of imperialism. They think they can crush anybody. Some of it has to do also with Islamophobia, with Orientalism, with the way they look at us, and they look at our people and say, oh, these people cannot stand up to us. It's exactly the same way that Israel thought of the Palestinians before October 7th, and their arrogance actually and their negligence and so on made the October 7th a huge success, to say that Israel dealt a huge failure and disaster in October 7th that basically destroyed this important, very, very important reputation of the mighty Israeli army and mighty Israeli power, that destroyed the base of Gaza, that Israel had, the U.S. secret base that was over there, the strength of the Israeli intelligence, the strength of the U.S. intelligence, and so on, and showed that Israel is not invincible as it has been before. Now the Iran is doing the same with the United States and saying you can, try, and every single day Trump gets up and says, oh, we won, the war is over, it's going to be over. We see that Iran is telling you, you can say whatever you want, but this is not the reality. You can try to attack us, and then Iran sends cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, and the United States is shocked about it, and then they come back and say we will continue to negotiate. And part of it is also the United States is shocked by the power and the ability of Iran, and it's something that we would say, like, why are you so shocked? Why are you so disturbed that people you've threatened again and again and again build their resources? So these are some comments in general, but I really want to talk more about the Palestinian situation. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of it, but I want to mention some things that we can throw in the mix and discuss it. That one really important thing is last week, Friday, was the anniversary of Nakba. It was 78 years since Israel was founded on May 14th, 1948, and Palestine fell, basically, causing the disposition of over 750,000 Palestinians. I'm sure many people in your audience are already aware how Israel and the Zionist movement in particular has implementing something called Plan Dalit D, which the Palestinian renowned historian Walid Khalidi has discussed it and talked about it, and then it has been more popularized by the Israeli scholar Ilan Pape, in that Israel has already carved a plan in order to get Palestinians in the northern villages to go to Lebanon, those who were in the western part towards the sea go to the west, towards towards Jordan and the West Bank. And I agree with that Jordan was actually created. Many of these borders actually were carved colonial borders. So even if we want to talk about them, what are these colonial borders? We can discuss them. And so they're colonial borders. They are set as such. And the Palestinians in the south, in Naqab and Bir al-Sabah and so on, were pushed towards Sinai. As a matter of fact, the Palestinian people in the south, which are adjacent to Gaza and Hebron, have since the 50s, Israel created something called Siyaj that surrounded the Naqab community and basically took over because of many things. The strategic place for it, taking it, that's where the Dimona, one of the Israeli nuclear reactors. Now, we don't think that this is the only one that is there. There are many others inside that Israel has, but this was the main one that was there, that they developed all of the nuclear power that has been already established through many studies. And there was a nuclear test between Israel and South Africa in 1979 that Qatar himself was aware of, but they hushed it up in order for them not to worsen the name of Israel, especially because there was going to be the agreement between Sadat and Israel. And I never call it a peace agreement because there was nothing peaceful about it. It was all about surrender, surrendering their largest Arab country, Egypt, to Israel. And basically we see what kind of disaster that has caused. But the Naqab, Israel has taken it over, and now there is at least between 30 to 40 communities in the Naqab of Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, whose children, male children, are forced to serve in the Israeli military because the leadership of the quote-unquote Bedouin, and we say Bedouin in Arabic, it's not, it doesn't have any kind of connotation, but in anthropological English, it has a derogatory meaning. Anyway, that they're supposed to serve in the Israeli military. And many do not serve, and there is many villages there that are quote-unquote unrecognized, meaning unrecognized by the Israeli government. That means that they don't have any services, electricity, water, sewage, schools, and so on. So the communities themselves have been resisting by creating solar panels, by providing schools, by taking care of their communities, standing with each other. There have been some martyrs from there, but this continues to be until today what's going on. And if you go to Naqab and stand there, you will see the connection between the Naqab communities and Hebron and Gaza. It is one community that has been divided in like 3 different parts, and this has been historically also part of the a plan by Israel to divide Palestinians themselves, to divide the Palestinian community. But so this is one of the things that have been part of this Palestinian struggle since Nakba and before, to insist on the unity of land, people, and cause, and has been reinforced a lot since after October 7th, and Palestinians coming together and struggling together and basically supporting the resistance. The Nakba, and also Israel has created multiple laws since it was founded. Like there was a law in the law of return to prevent Palestinians from coming, but also give Israelis citizenship to any Jew who arrives in Israel automatically. And of course, Palestinians are not allowed, including the descendants of the 750,000 who are spread all over refugee camps. And now we have millions of Palestinians are outside, have been born or have lived outside Palestine. And so now they're not allowed. And now every single time you talk about Palestinians' right of return, which is a right, and it was also supported by the United Nations Resolution 194 of December 1948, that is part of the, said that they have to be able to return. Israel says no way, because if you do that, you will change the demographic character of the state of Israel. You'll have more Palestinians than Jews, and that will become an apartheid state, as if it's not already apartheid. So this is one of the laws. There is the property law that takes over all Palestinian land, basically dispossesses Palestinians further. Just to say also that the land goes into the trusteeship of the Jewish National Fund. It's not actually even, it's for the Jews of the world. All the Jews of the world basically own it. And there is multiple other laws, and I want to just mention, for example, one, which is the Nakba law, which was re-established in 2011, that prevents Palestinians in the 48 areas to commemorate the Nakba. However, Palestinians reject that. So this Nakba, for example, Palestinian elders took their children with them and their children's children to the villages that were destroyed in 1940, over 532, and showed them where they came from, what are their villages, where the villages. If we have more time, I would talk about what happened to the villages. Some were destroyed completely. Some were dismantled or were taken over and made into artist colonies, where the Israeli, quote unquote, secular. So we're not only talking about religious Jews, which the media would like us believe, took over and made it into artist colonies and basically dumped their garbage over the cemeteries of Palestinians, which is another issue we talk about. And so Palestinians went to the villages, but also last weekend, Palestinian students, Palestinian families, Palestinian leaders went to Tel Aviv University, which is one of the main castles of Israeli Zionism, and one of the let's say the factories that produces Zionism, produces weapons, produces intelligence, produces the rhetoric argument of how to fight Palestinians, produces genocide, has students of genocide. Palestinian students and communities went together and have commemorated the Nakba and sang Mawtani, which is the Palestinian anthem, despite what Israel says and so on. And this is really important, that you're talking about few generations and people are still resisting. And it's also really important for what's happening also within the Palestinian community itself, body politics, that despite all these efforts from 1948 to the present 78 years, and over 100 years of the Zionist movement coming to erase Palestinians, because this is the goal of the Zionist movement, to complete erasure of the Palestinians, getting rid of all the Palestinians, getting rid of the Palestinians' relationship with the land, getting rid of the Palestinian vegetation and the environment, getting rid of the Palestinian, even the history, the architecture, everything that's Palestinian, getting rid of all of it in order to remove Palestinian and say this is a people without a land without a people. They failed, and this is why we see the genocide escalating more and more and more. But until now, that's even a failure. That's really important. Tell me, Janine, where we are in terms of time. I know I don't want you to get anxious.
Yes, I will have to ask you to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to say yeah.
Sure, thank
you.
I'm
going to say a couple of things, and then we can leave the rest to discussion or another time. So it's really important to say on the 78th anniversary of Nakba. Even though the Nakba is ongoing, the Nakba has not stopped. The Nakba is even getting worse because Israel is trying to eliminate more Palestinians. In Gaza, they have killed, and this is part of the genocide, is to actually eliminate children, the future generation, to establish the reproductive genocide, to prevent even women to have more children. I mean, this is all part of genociding people, and it's by the definition of the United Nations and the ICJ, which is, we say, is the lowest denominator. This is something that Israel has failed. And even in the West Bank, there is settlers who are actually stealing sheep and killing sheep and taking over more land. And Smotrich went over and said he's going to take more land and so on. The International Criminal Court issued an warrant against him. The Palestinians themselves are resisting. They're staying put. So resistance is not only armed resistance, it's not only armed struggle. Resistance is also by staying put, refusing to leave land, despite all the violence that Israel is, and this is colonial violence, is not easy. And we know with the history with indigenous people, with the history of any people around the world, it's a very nasty violence. Part of it is because getting rid of the colonized, crushing the resistance of the colonized, and teaching them a lesson that don't you even dare stand up against us. And we know Palestinians, like other colonized people, they feel defeat and then they stand up and they fight again, including, I think, October 7 is very important part of it. So there is continuing resistance, and resistance becomes more innovative and stronger. The other thing that's really, really important as part of the resistance and the struggle and the support from people like the government of Iran, like Lebanese, like Iraqis, like the Yemenis. I mean, so now we have the Red Sea. Israel cannot go there. This is a very important way of implementing BDS. You cannot go there. And then we have Hormuz, Straits of Hormuz. So very important two straits that Israel and the US have had high hopes for are not going on. We have the international solidarity movement in other ways. We saw today Ben Gvir going and abusing the people from the solidarity movement who are coming on the flotilla and bragging as if it's something he's proud of. I mean, this is like so stupid that if you do something of this sort, why are you even bragging? I mean, you think you're going to get a medal in brutality and fascism, and so it shows how desperate they are, how much they are losing. And we know that oppressors get nastier when they lose. When they lose, they lash out even more and more because they are so frustrated that they stopped the flotilla before and they arrested Saif Abu Kishek and Thiago Avila. And then what happened is that more flotillas came about. So the international movement is moving stronger. Iran is standing up and fighting against the US and defending the region, and also as Professor Zafar said, even the Gulf states, and now there is a strong movement in the Arab world saying you need to get rid of the bases. You have to kick out the bases from the Arab lands. We don't want them there. So now they are actually backing out. Yeah, United Arab Emirates. I mean, what is the so that's really important. And then there is a solidarity movement that's happening everywhere. I'm stopping. Okay, I just want to say that we are in a place where things are really moving, and we should really engage in the revolutionary optimism. We should be in this kind of feeling, because whatever they are doing, we are moving ahead. It's going to be very difficult for few years, but the future is ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdulhadi, and I definitely agree that the future is ours. And I'm glad you mentioned the flotilla, and I'm sure across Canada people are mobilizing. There are a number, I think 12 people from Canada that are abducted and part of the 428, I believe, Global Samud Flotilla participants currently unjustly, illegally held in Zionist Israel. I'm going to go on. We have two final speakers, but the next one is a short video. So Dr. Marwa Osman was not able to join us in person, but has sent a clip of short video footage and then her some comments that she wanted to share with us. Dr. Marwa Osman is a Lebanese academic, journalist, and political commentator, and host and producer of the PressTV show, The MidEaStream. and a university lecturer at the Lebanese International University and Maaref University. So I'll queue up her 2 videos, which will be just about 6 minutes, and then we'll go up on to our final speaker, Ali Mala.
This week, the Middle East stands dangerously close to a historic rupture. What we are witnessing is no longer a contained confrontation or a temporary escalation. It is the gradual collapse of the old regional order under the weight of military failure, political desperation, and strategic miscalculation. As this war enters its 78th day, Washington appears to be moving toward what can only be described as strategic self-destruction. The unprecedented American military buildup across the region, including nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, strategic bombers, and growing speculation about potential ground operations inside Iran, does not project confidence. It projects anxiety. Because after weeks of airstrikes and pressure campaigns, the reality is becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Iran has not been broken, and the balance of deterrence has not shifted in Washington's favor. At the same time, Lebanon is now facing one of the most dangerous political moments in its modern history. Behind closed doors in Washington, efforts are reportedly underway to impose what many inside Lebanon are already calling a modern version of the 1983 17th of May Agreement, an arrangement designed to transform the Lebanese state into a security instrument serving Israeli entity strategic interests. Under the proposed framework, thousands of Lebanese troops would be deployed south of the Litani River, while resistance-linked infrastructure would be dismantled under direct American and Israeli entity supervision. But for Hezbollah and a large segment of the Lebanese political landscape, this is not diplomacy. It is an attempt to achieve politically what Zionist Israel failed to achieve militarily, and that is where the battlefield itself becomes decisive. Because while diplomats draft documents in foreign capitals, the military reality on the ground continues moving in the opposite direction. Israeli entity armored units have suffered repeated losses across southern Lebanon, with Merkava tanks, engineering vehicles, and troop carriers reportedly destroyed in a series of highly coordinated resistance operations. The resistance is no longer operating purely defensively. It is deploying precision drones, fiber optic guided systems, and increasingly sophisticated anti-air capabilities that are reshaping the battlefield itself. Meanwhile, Persian Gulf states are quietly preparing for the possibility that this conflict may soon spill beyond Lebanon and Palestine into the wider region. Defensive measures, military readiness, and emergency planning are intensifying behind the scenes. Because this time, the fear spreading across the Middle East is no longer about whether escalation is coming. It is about whether anyone still has the ability to stop it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marwa Osman. I'm a Southern Lebanese mother of 3, an assistant professor at Maaref University, and a broadcaster speaking. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marwa Osman. I'm a Southern Lebanese mother of 3, an assistant professor at Maaref University, and a broadcaster speaking to you directly from. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marwa Osman. I'm a Southern Lebanese mother of 3, an assistant professor at Maaref University, and a broadcaster speaking to you directly from Beirut, Lebanon. First, I would like to sincerely thank the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network for inviting me to participate in this immensely important event, and for continuing to create spaces where truth can still be spoken in a world increasingly dominated by censorship, intimidation, and manufactured narratives. For us right here in Lebanon, this discussion is not theoretical. It is not geopolitical analysis from a distance. It is our daily reality. It is our homes, our villages, our children, and our future that are constantly placed under threat. And yet, despite everything, despite the bombs, the pressure, the propaganda, and the attempts to break our will, our people remain steadfast, as always. Now, for months now, the world has been watching South Lebanon through fragmented headlines and very carefully curated narratives. But on the ground, a very different reality is unfolding. From Qawzah to Naqoura, the Israeli occupation forces are facing a battlefield far more complex and very costly than they anticipated. Multiple infiltrations attempts by them have been met with fierce resistance through FPV drone strikes, through precision attacks, and direct close-quarter confrontations. The consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Even Israeli media outlets are now openly discussing the growing difficulty of sustaining military operations in South Lebanon. Now, in the span of a single week, this past week, the occupation announced the deaths of multiple officers and soldiers. The famous Al-Bayada site, once presented a strategic foothold for them, has effectively become untenable under constant pressure from the Lebanese resistance Hezbollah. What was marketed as deterrence is now gradually turning into attrition. At the same time, we have facing another danger here in Lebanon, one from within. Certain political factions within the Lebanese government appear more concerned with negotiating arrangements that accommodate Israeli enemy security demands than actually protecting Lebanese sovereignty itself and Lebanese people themselves. They speak the language of stability, while legitimizing continued violations against Lebanon as a whole, not only South Lebanon. Now, what comes next will likely determine the future of the entire region. Zionist Israel cannot sustain an open-ended war of exhaustion indefinitely, especially when the cost is rising militarily, economically, and psychologically as well. This leaves two possible scenarios: either a dramatic escalation, potentially involving simultaneous strikes on Beirut and Tehran at the same time in an attempt to restore some sort of deterrence, or just a gradual retreat resembling the reality that was imposed in 2006 by the resistance. History has already shown that military superiority alone does not guarantee political victory. And once again, South Lebanon is proving that occupation carries a price that may ultimately become too heavy to bear. From Beirut, I salute to every free voice refusing silence and to every people still resisting domination in all its forms. Thank you.
Wonderful. So a big thank you to Dr. Marwa Osman for sending that video to us. As we know, as she said, we are facing not just the headlines, but are living this daily reality. So I ask everyone to send our best wishes to Dr. Marwa Osman, and we will let her know that we all listened to the video and we are all standing with her and with the people of Lebanon. I am very happy now to hand off the virtual mic to our final speaker, who is going to round out our excellent panel of speakers today. Ali Mala is an anti-war and community activist, board member of Just Peace Advocates, and has served on the National Steering Committee of the former Canadian Peace Alliance, the Coordinating Committee of the Toronto Coalition to Stop the War, and as board member of the Centre for Social Justice. Ali is also a union activist with CUPE, former vice president of the Canadian Arab Federation, and member of the board of directors of Alternatives Canada, Urban Alliance on Race Relations, and the Anti-Racism Task Force. So I think with all of those activism-related credentials, this is a good place to jump off from our webinar into action and into some of what Ali wants to share with us tonight. So I'll hand over the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you, everyone. I'm so honored to be among those panelists, and also thankful for organizing this, and also for the audience who were following us on this webinar, and even for the people who couldn't stay. I think everything I want to say had been said, so maybe it's good to stay to the end, so like you don't have to talk much. But let me start by confirming what Sister Dr. Rabab said about the 78 years of Nakba, which catastrophe, and she mentioned it, and despite all the suffering and all the pain and all the loss of the Palestinian people still and continue to resist. And therefore, Israel will never, ever have a peace, unless Palestine is liberated and it will be one democratic state for all of its inhabitants, and the return of the Palestinian refugees, not only from the region, but also from around the world. Sister Marwa talked about Lebanon in general. She didn't talk about her own village or town, actually, you know, like Dr. Rabab knows, you know, we say village, but it's, you know, much more like than town. Her town called Khiyam, and it's close to the border. And almost 90%, if not more, of Khiyam being erased and destroyed. And it's not only Khiyam. You know, I know like the time is really tight here. Many villages or towns have been erased to the ground in order to have what we call the burned land where people don't go back. But obviously they are hugely mistaken because the Lebanese people, and especially, you know, the people of the resistance, whether combatant or not, will never give up and will never surrender. There is a say by a great African thinker and author, Ashebe, until the lions have their own historians, the glory of the hunt always goes to the hunters. And the whole narrative around the situation in the region really requires much more than this webinar. And maybe the subject of this webinar could be divided in each area by itself, because there's so much history, you know, whether from the conspiracy by the British and later the American against Iran and the Iranian people, or before them, the French mandate and the Western about the whole region as a whole. And as Dr. Rabab mentioned, and also Brother Zafar mentioned, about the whole region and the states we have right now, it's all artificial. It used to be called Bilad al-Sham. And Bilad al-Sham is the land of the, well, Sham is now known as the capital of Syria. But Bilad al-Sham refers to the whole region from Palestine till Iraq, including Lebanon, Jordan, and even some historians say there is also, you know, an island in Greek belong to the region. Lebanon was not a country until 1920, and not even as a country. It was announced by General Gouraud, the French leader of the French military, when they defeated the Syrian army and the combatant in August 1920. And shortly after a couple of weeks, he announced the Grand Lebanon. Lebanon officially took its independence in 1943. So I am from the South, and so many parts of the South were a part of Palestine. You know, Sidon is the capital of the South and used to be attached to Jericho, Akka. From the north, many cities and towns were attached to Syria, like major province like Hama at that time, and Homs. From the Biqa', you know, Biqa' to the south used to belong to Damascus and its neighborhood. So the conspiracy to create those artificial borders and the state is a part of colonial project started much earlier than the Balfour Declaration and the Zionist movement and the Basel Conference, where they start, you know, promoting the Zionist ideas for independent or for their own land. There is a book, I believe the author is Ronald Saunders, and the title is The High Walls of Jerusalem, and was written in early 19th century or a little bit after, but it talks about the original colonial project by the powerful, rich French, German, and British people and other Europeans who were closely associated with current days Christian evangelists, where they eyed the region, which I don't call the Middle East, but the region as a launching pad for international imperialist project. So this is a little bit of history, and it's much, much richer than that, but I'm aware of the time, and I know some people have questions. Lebanese people, and mainly in the south and the Biqa', and to a certain extent, used to be much more, like from the Tripoli, from the north up to Beirut, were entwined with Palestinian people and with Palestinian questions, because we are one people, and we have one important cause is to defeat and continue confronting the Zionist imperialist project in our area. Many of you might be aware of Sykes-Picot, where the French and the British decided to slice the region and created those artificial boundaries and facilitated the Zionist project in the region. Mind you, unfortunately, some local players, whether from landowners or aspiring politicians, played some role in facilitating the sale of land to Zionist agency at that time. And it's across sectarian and religion. It's not only one sect per se, Christian or Muslim or etc. The conflict, actually the war between Lebanon and the Zionist state, goes back to the early days when the Zionist agency started establishing its footnote or footland in Palestine. Many attached towns between Lebanon and Palestine seen direct fight between Lebanese, Palestinian, and Zionist. And even until the so-called peace accord or ceasefire accord in 1948 and 49, Israel committed so many genocides in many towns, whether inside Palestine or outside the so-called border of Palestine, which the Lebanese borders. So it's not something new. And the people are fully aware of that. Despite the fact that, as Sister Marwa mentioned, about the heavy price we are paying, but the people of Lebanon would not accept any so-called ceasefire or peace accord with the Zionists, as it happened in 1983. In 1983, after the invasion of Lebanon and the establishment of a fascist, phalangist government and the president of the republic after the assassination of the first one who was elected by the Israeli tank, Bashir Ismail. So his brother, Amin Ismail, was elected, excuse me, and he pushed, relying on the support from the Americans and the French and the Europeans, to push for so-called peace accord with the Zion state, which was signed in May 17th, 1983. It didn't sit well with the nationalist Lebanese, whether they are Marxist, leftist, or pan-Arabist, especially after the massacre against the Palestinians and Lebanese in Sabra and Shatila. That's why, like I said, we need much more time to really cover those points, but I'm jumping quickly to allow time for questions. And the Lebanese people have their own intifada. Salam, Dr. Rabab. They have their own intifada in February 6, 1984, and get rid of the so-called peace accord with Israel and force literally a new waves, a new spirit of nationalism among Lebanese. And we know after the occupation in 1982, the Lebanese people start resisting the Israeli occupations. Sadly, Western and some others would refer to resistance movement as a proxy of Iran, like the same with with the revolutionary people of Yemen as a proxy of Iran, or the people who confronted the U.S. occupation, in Iraq as a proxy of Iran. No, this is not the case. People are stood up and start resisting their occupiers. So I'm looking at the watch here at the time. As I said, we have too much to say and to explore. But the fact is, the reality right now in Lebanon, literally, not only in the south, but the barbarity of the Zion state is also hitting the north, hitting the Bekaa, hitting Beirut, and almost every day, they are issuing a warning to several villages to evacuate. And, there is no final calculation of the victims, but majority of the victims are civilians. And in many cases, 3-generation families. Imagine 3 generations families, including couple yesterday. With yesterday bombing, 40 murders and about 45 wounded people. And that include the grandparents, direct parents, and the grandchildren. This is what's literally happening in Lebanon. And as someone said, it's like victims in waiting, because almost all of us in the south and the Bekaa and other areas are literally waiting to what is next. Whether the Zionist occupational army issue a warning or not, we know. Our people over there are living in the eyes of the storm. And so many stories to be told. And, I don't want to say about me, but last year, I lost 10 of my immediate family. And in this month, March, April, another 5. And I'm not alone. My family, it's one of the hundreds of families have paid heavy price, similar to the thousands and thousands of families in Gaza. With all of this, if you talk to people, forget the bought yellow media and outlets being paid and supported by certain US and Western dark circles. The majority of the people refute the occupation, insist on continue the war until the Zion state is defeated and withdrawn, to the original lines. We don't say border because we do not recognize as a borders for the Zion states. We say, southern and northern borders of Palestine. So I would leave here. I know I didn't cover everything because literally I don't know how much time we have, but I know there is a questions, and I think it is fair to address those questions. And hopefully Janine and Ken and others, we know will continue this kind of webinars, not only because it's historical and educational purposes, but also as tools to keep mobilizing our communities, our friends, our people, and to challenge the current narratives, which is dominated by, the media of Murdoch and others. Thank you so much, and much appreciation to everyone here.
Thank you very much, Ali. I know being the final speaker means kind of having the job of wrapping up a very big topic, and I appreciate you taking on that task. We had a very ambitious topic with this webinar tonight to understand the U.S.-Israeli aggression in all of West Asia and ambitious in the fact that there is a lot to cover, but important to bring all together because we know that this is not just a genocide in Gaza, not just a bombing campaign and war on Lebanon, not just a war on Iran, but this is altogether a existential war of U.S. imperialism against all nations of West Asia fighting for their self-determination and sovereignty. So I think I thank all the speakers for covering the various topics and trying to bring together so much information in a very short time. We do have a few questions, and I want to thank Mona, who has been diligently going through some of the questions that are more specific to Iran, and getting some answers just in the text chat, specifically on the case of Iran, answering the, what's the response to the very insane amount of Iranian diaspora who are actually coming out in favor of U.S. intervention, and I think Mona provided a very good explanation about the Western propaganda campaign and the importance of patience and continued education. So Mona, if you want to maybe highlight any of the points that I know that you've been commenting on in the chat and in the question and answers that you'd like to highlight for the wider audience here, I'll pass that on to you. And while you're taking a moment maybe to think that over, there was another question in the chat that I think there's a lot that it's a short question, and I think there's a lot that could be said about it. The question is, how can some action be considered a war crime when there's no policing, accepted judicial action on it, or effective enforcement? So a short question, but I have a few thoughts on that, and others might too. So Mona, would you like to add anything in terms of the questions that have been coming up in the chat regarding Iran?
Thank you, Janine. Not really. But if the people who asked the questions have some follow-up, I'm happy to also answer that in verbally or however. I think you did a good job of summarizing that question about the support of some Iranian Canadians or Iranian diaspora members who support sanctions. Yeah, I think the main thing was continued education. And I think that people, as I said in the text answer, that sometimes the second generations have a different perspective, because when people leave Iran, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, it could be for reasons of they have some kind of political grievance, and they may have like a reactionary attitude. And then when they come here and their children grow up and realize that this society also has its faults, and there isn't, they lose that veneer, and they learn that to be more critical of, the messaging. And there was another question about why a report by the New York Times wanting that the US and Israel wanted to put Ahmadinejad back in power. Unfortunately, I don't have the detailed assessment of that. But I know that Ahmadinejad had some dispute with the leadership, the supreme leader, and the person did ask a follow-up question, and I think that maybe the New York Times could also be, embellishing things for its own purposes, or making up the story in retrospect. Who knows? But I think that they didn't. The questioner didn't understand. Okay, how could he side with Israel against his own country and government? It doesn't make sense. And I think that's probably a correct assessment, because I remember Ahmadinejad was very anti-West in his rhetoric, And a lot of people didn't like him because he was a hardliner. And it just kind of shows the degree of complexity of Iranian politics that, in the West sometimes gets glossed over in those, kind of propagandistic reports that, want to paint, simplify it. But I think that, the key is also there's the arrogance of the the CIA and the Mossad and all these political forces, that sometimes they underestimate, because somebody, just because I have a dispute with my dad, it doesn't mean I'm going to be okay with someone, harming him, right? So, like, they overestimate the degree to which those disputes matter in the grand scheme of things. In the grand scheme of things, usually people are, even if they have disputes with the government, they maintain their nationalism and pride and desire to maintain their sovereignty. So it could be just a mistake on the part of the imperialist powers.
May I follow that up? First of all, what Mona mentioned, that the New York Times saying that the US or CIA wanted to put Ahmadinejad as the leader. I mean, that shows the arrogance of these people. Who gave them that right to determine who's going to be the real leader or ruler of a particular country? I mean, it's for the people of Iran to decide. And there's a system in place that elects the new leader, not America or Israel or the CIA. So that shows their arrogance. Secondly, I also want to touch on this aspect about Iranians outside Iran, particularly in the US or in Canada, demonstrating. On March the 15th, Dmitry Laskaris, who's a well-known human rights lawyer and activist, and he also has his own YouTube channel. He said that he was in Montreal and he was in the gym and he was listening to this news on the CBC, and they said that there are 30,000 Iranians out in the street. They are waving the Shah's flags, etc. So he said, after a while, I went out and he said, I looked around and there weren't even 300 people over there. And this media was telling, he said, I was right there in the middle. And they were saying there are 30,000 Iranians over here. So this is how they try to play up on these things. And you would notice that whenever they cover these events, they wouldn't show you a long shot. They will show it very close, zoom in, so you're very close. You can't really figure out how many people there are, because when you take, I do this thing as well. When we cover these things, we film things. When you do it from close up, it appears a whole lot of people. So the people who are watching from outside, they don't even know how many people are present over there. So this is how this media plays these games, trying to influence people's thinking. But I think we have seen the evidence and the proof, particularly in Iran. They were saying for years and years that the people of Iran are fed up with the government. They will come out and they will overthrow the government. Sure, on the first day of February 28th, when the bombings took place, so many innocent people were martyred. The people did come out into the squares, particularly in the Palestine Square or Revolution Square. Hundreds of thousands of them, but not to overthrow the government. They came out in support of the government against the US. They were shouting Mark bar America, Mark bar Israel. They were not shouting against their own government. So, when we look at the reality of how the people of Iran think, and why should they, support somebody else coming and bombing their country? Why? Who on earth is going to support somebody coming to kill their own children? I mean, this is insane. But somehow they tend to sort of put this into the minds of people, creating the impression as if the people of Iran are against the government. If they were, there is no reason that the government would have survived. When you look at Venezuela, their own people betrayed them, and Maduro was kidnapped, his wife was kidnapped in January, and now they are languishing in an American prison. But in Iran, the people are solidly with the government. Even those people who were previously critical of the government, when it came to Iran's sovereignty, when it came to Iran's independence, They are solidly for an independent Iran. They don't want anybody else to decide for them. And so this is something important that our listeners and our viewers should keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, both to Mona and Zafar. I think our speakers covered a lot, and it is getting later on, especially towards the east. I'm over on the west coast, so the sun is still up here. But I had three questions I want to put together that I'll pose to our speakers, and then our speakers can either respond or add any closing comments that they'd like. And I think some of these questions sort of come back to our responsibility as anti-war activists and organizers, and what we need to do in the anti-war movement. So the first question, as I mentioned earlier, is how can some action be considered a war crime when there's no policing, accepted judicial action on it, or effective enforcement? And my 2 cents is the enforcement or the action is people in the street. The second question is how Israel can be defeated if they have nuclear and other advanced weapons. And the UN has shown they are powerless too, which loops into that first question. And then also for Dr. Abdulhadi, but also for, I think, everyone in terms of the land acknowledgement that you've done in calling for justice for Indigenous Americans. What do you think it'll take for American people, and I'd say also people in Canada, to show more urgent solidarity to the plight of Native Americans, Indigenous Hawaiians, and Indigenous Alaskans? So let's see, we've had Mona and Zafar. If you want, because you've already spoken in the discussion, I'll go on to either Rabab or Ali if you'd like to add on any closing comments and any responses to those questions. And then I'll come back to Mona and Zafar.
No, I defer.
Ali, if you want to.
No, I defer to Dr. Rabab.
Okay. All right. So I'll just say a couple of things. The question is who's considering whom war criminal and who's doing the policing and the accountability. There has never been a moment in history that UN agencies or anything like that have ever been carrying justice. The UN agencies and international powers, they are always the reflection of whatever the balance of forces in the world. The United Nations, the League of Nations, all of them have participated in the so-called mandate, which nobody gave them a mandate, so-called the League of Nations in 1920. They certified the Sykes-Picot, the division of the region, and so on. 1947, it was the partition of Palestine, and they gave the Zionist movement the larger part of Palestine, and they so-called passed the return resolution, never implemented. 1967, all of them, they never happened. There is multiple resolutions, and there is some by the Security Council, which is supposed to be binding. They have never made them binding, even though they're supposed to be binding and have to, they never did. And so, this happens, and the United States comes in and says, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. This will never, ever happen. But I want to point out where things actually worked. I want to point out to 2 examples, at least. I want to point out to Vietnam and South Africa. The United States had nuclear powers. The small nation of Vietnam defeated the biggest imperialist power in the world. And I said there is going to be a lot of victims. Vietnam lost at least 3 million martyrs, at least. And they still are suffering from Agent Orange, napalm, and they're still trying until now. And the United States says, what Agent Orange? It did not affect us. Very weird. It affected US veterans in Vietnam, but it did not affect Vietnamese. I mean, this is the logic, and the lies doesn't really work. You just have to defeat them and force them. And so this Vietnam is a very big example for all of us to see how people stand. And now what Iran is doing is making the United States real. And this is something that actually shows the same thing with what Brother Ali said about Lebanon. Again and again and again, even when you say about Khiyam, it was destruction of Khiyam, also destruction of the prison. That shows the failure and shows the collaborators and so on. They don't want even proof that this existed, you know, the repression and the torture, and also the defeat of that, and the name of all the collaborators that they had in Khiyam. They keep doing it, and the resistance keeps building it. So I think this is something we need, and it's really important. The International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, that actually doing it. This has not really happened before. For us, for the Palestinians, this is shocking. Pleasantly shocking that these things are happening, that there is the conscience of the world is moving so much that the people are pressuring their governments to do the stuff that is happening. I mean, the United States, Israel has now fallen its popularity 70%. It's unheard of. I mean, we really need to actually understand what this is happening. This is something that will push, and if this has happened before, Israel will collapse if the United States doesn't give them weapons and so on. Zionism, I always say Zionism as a passing phenomena. The question is how long we can get them to pass. This is it, and reduce the victims. The second question, the second example, South Africa. Who ever thought that South African apartheid will ever be gone? How did it happen? The whole accountability, I mean, they didn't finish it completely, because apartheid economically and so on is not gone. It's there in South Africa. Still, the task is very long to go. But there were some victims of some accountability. Same thing in Latin America, in Brazil, in Colombia, something. It's not finished because the will is not there yet. The generals are there still. The killers are still there. In France as well. So I think it's really the will. And the Palestinians, let's say many of us, the majority of the Palestinian people support the resistance. The majority of the Palestinian people do not want Zionism. The majority of the Palestinians have never agreed to so-called two-state solution. And even two-state solution, who's doing this? Why are we as Palestinians supposed to provide a solution for those who are oppressing us? We are against all of this totally, completely. And even some Palestinians now saying, even if you want to talk about democratic secular state, people are saying, how are we going to live with those who are killing us? I mean, Palestinians are saying that. So this is really, I mean, it's not happening tomorrow. So this is a question, it's the principle of a Palestine liberated, free, that everybody lives together in peace and so on our own terms. That's a different question than all the Zionists who have did all the killing. Everybody comes in, and like South Africa have, some equal rights. That's a very different question. So I think all the determination of the word for Palestine elsewhere. The similar question with the indigenous people. When I started doing this, the land acknowledgement, the Zionists, all the Zionists say, Rabab Abdulhadi always does land acknowledgement. Like, to hell with you. You can say, because you don't want me to do that because you are settler colonists. Of course it bothers you. But I think it's very, very important, if we don't acknowledge rights of other people, if we don't do the indivisibility of justice, think only about justice for us, but not justice for other people, what kind of work we're doing? We're hypocrites. We really have to talk about everybody. How could we live in somebody's land? How could I, as a Palestinian, live on somebody's land and demand that the settlers move from my land? Acknowledge that. And I think it's really a question of acknowledging people and saying, what do they want? And so it's not just, oh, I recognize your land, but I'm going to still live on it. We have to support land back. We have to support the indigenous communities who are actually saying that you're living, at the very least, pay taxes to the land. You pay taxes to the United States government. How come you don't bother with the indigenous communities? What is going on? The residential schools, that this scandal has and is still going on, the bones of the people. I think we need to humanize ourselves and say, this is what we want it for everybody. And I think this is something that we really need to educate. I think Palestinians, like when we went on the delegation, I'm going to say very short, 30 seconds. When we went on the Indigenous and Women of Color Feminist delegation, the first morning we got up, and we had Wazia Tawan, my friend, my sister from the indigenous nations in Minnesota. She got up and she introduced herself in her language, and she said, this is who I am. The first comment from the Palestinian woman, from the Palestinian Feminist Union, she said, I understand exactly what you are saying. I recognize your pain and I understand what you're saying. It was something like recognition of what happens when we are kicked off our land, what happens when our food is appropriated and now served in all these fancy restaurants. These are things that actually recognize with each other. We cannot not recognize our other people's pain and only demand it for ourselves. So I think it's something we need to just do education and sympathy with everybody, and always figure out one part of our world gets liberated is for all of us.
Thank you, Rabab. Ali, I think, would you like to add anything for those points or
Yes,
any closing
I
comments?
want to emphasize and focus on what Sister Rabab has spoken about. And it's not a criticism, but I might differ with the international conscience. I'm sure you and me mean, the public international conscience, not the official one, because the international conscience for the so-called international community, international organization is dead and buried with the genocide against Gaza and the shameless silence by Western states and North American, including Canada. And you mentioned about the bones and the schools. Canada, we have been gobbling with it for several years so far, and there is no genuine attempts or desire to really address what happened. I don't know if it could be addressed, but at least take heavy responsibility against what happened of the people, of the land. I call them the people of the land, the indigenous people, whether in North America or in Australia or New Zealand. Sister Janine, somebody asked about, how do you join the Canada Wide? Maybe you can include that. But I want to conclude by saying is, education, networking, and we have to focus our efforts, with activists from unions, from community base, even churches, even mosques, even synagogues, because this is the only so far to build a huge mobilization in order to force the government to start making change. We know they talk to us and lecture us about the land of honey and the land of democracy. We all remember when Madeleine Albright was asked, about the 500,000 Iraqis who've been killed as a result of the siege and the famine imposed against Iraqi people. And she said, it's worth it. It might be worth it. And we remember Hillary Clinton with the so-called her comment about Gaddafi and about ISIS, how they created ISIS and all the massacre took place. Oh, we were there. We were there. We saw, and he died or they died. So we know they have no morals. They have no ethics. And in the same time, they are the one who try to lecture us. Imagine an illegal state like the United States, because, it's a settler colonial state, would dare to challenge a civilization like the Persian civilization, who is more than 5,000 years old and is so rich with all aspects of science, cultural history, poetry, everything. And their attempt to dehumanize, our people, from Palestine till, Persia or Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran. And their fallacy and hypocrisy. It's okay to make a caricature of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's okay to burn the Quran. It's a freedom of expression and democratic rights. But I dare you, it's not okay to wear a kafiyah or to raise the Iranian flag or the Palestinian flag. And where? In France, the state of the so-called human rights, birthplace, or Germany, or Britain, or maybe later on will coming to us. So our solution is to start working closely and keep building coalition. Look what happened last week, at the Canadian Labour Congress convention. This is a precedent where the National Union or Coalition of Union adopted no arm embargo resolution. So people, when they get together and they are determined, and yes, we might have a little space for difference of opinions here or there, but the most important thing is a clear understanding of the imperialist and colonial project, against all the people, not only us in the region, even here in Canada and in the US. How many billion they spent in this war? And what about the homeless? From the state more than us. But we know here, the homeless, the problem with education, they cancel OSAP or they reduce OSAP, for heaven's sake, with like tuition support for students. The healthcare is deteriorating. The jobless rate is increased. So their war is not only on us and our people, but also on the poor. Because you know what? War benefit the rich and paid by the poor. And my final comment is, the people united will never be defeated. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ali. And Zafar or Mona, did you have any last closing words to add?
I think Ali closed it so well.
Yes, yes, I agree. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. I truly believe that we are really in a turning point in history. I'm so grateful to have the chance to come together to spend 2 hours on various different time zones discussing these very important topics and how we as the anti-war movement, as activists, as organizers, fit in to this struggle that is being waged on many fronts, from Iran and Lebanon, Hezbollah, Palestine, Yemen, Cuba, as we talked about, to all of us and many of us, I think, in North America, or many of us, I think, joining in beyond North America as part of the solidarity anti-war movement. These are intertwined struggles, and I think we're at a turning point. We will keep coming together for these webinars with the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. I encourage people to join the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network if you're part of an organization that would like to join the over 60 groups across Canada. I've put in the chat a few times where you can find out more, but peaceandjusticenetwork.ca is our website. And let's keep organizing, keep coming together, keep building a united front against war, occupation, genocide, and for a better world. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.